Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a book haul revisit. So if you are new here, hi, this is where I look at book hauls from this month in the past and see how many of those books I have read, how many I still want to read, how many I might have already gotten rid of, and think about whether or not there are any in here that I would like to get rid of or unhaul to make space. I'm not feeling a crunch for space right now because I have a new library. We expanded the shelves. I'll put a link to the video down below where I give a tour of this new book setup. But eventually space is going to get tight again and I will have to start thinking about what I want to keep and what I might need to get rid of. It's a way of helping me be more accountable for the books that I purchase. It helps me be more intentional with how I spend money on books. I might do a longer video on this in the future, but I feel like since I've expanded the library, I've become a little bit more of a book collector. Like I'm much more into library building and finding nice editions of books that would be interesting to have on my shelves. But I'm going to do that in a separate conversation at some point because I'm still kind of working through the details of it in my head. This is a significant book haul revisit because this is the first time I have 4 years of book hauls to look at. I started my channel at the end of 2018, so 2019 was my first full year. But in the beginning, I didn't think I was going to do book hauls because, you know, in that way of a new booktuber, I was like, I need to do things different. Everybody does book hauls. I'm going to not be somebody who does those. The problem is, I like to talk about books that I bring into my library, and I get excited about them. They're fun to talk about. So by March, I decided to do my first ever book haul. So that's why March is the month where they actually begin, and that's why this is the first where I have 4. So we have 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. We're going to start with the most recent one and work our way back in time. And I should tell you up front before we get going that in my book haul revisits, I don't spend a lot of time talking about what each book is about. So if you want more information about a specific book that I'm going to talk about, I will link the individual book haul videos down below. You should go check that out instead. Now we have 4 years of book hauls to get through. Some of these are pretty small, so it's not going to be too bad. But I do want to make sure I get going on this journey. So again, we're starting with the most recent. We're going to start talking about March of 2022. There were 4 books that I brought into my library 1 year ago. The first one is Before Night Falls by Reinaldo. This is a translated book. I have wanted to read it for a long time. I purchased a copy because of the LGBTQ+ in translation read along, which was going on last year. This was a book that I had selected. It is translated by Dolores M. Koch. And as such, I did read it for the LGBTQ+ in translation read along. So this is a success story. We are starting off with a bang. This is a book that I purchased and read in quick succession. I did purchase this next one for the same reason, for the LGBTQ+ in translation read-along, and I did not have as much luck with it. It's Disoriental by Négar Djavadi. This is also obviously in translation by Tina Cover. It doesn't say on the cover. Now, I started this one on audio and was a little bit confused. I think this is a book that you need to orient yourself to once you get started because other people in the group had a similar problem getting going with it. But once they worked past that, they were fine. And they did say that audio makes it a little bit more difficult to access the book and get going. Everybody who continued with it loved it. I had intended to switch to the physical book. And, you know, the danger with me switching formats of a book or putting something down and trying to restart it like a week or 2 later is that a lot of time can end up passing. So that's what happened to me with this. I did start it, but I have not finished it yet. And again, the people who continued with the book and finished it loved it. This ended up being one of Jen the Librarian's favorite reads from last year. So I do want to get back to it. I don't know when, but I'm going to keep it and I will work on making that happen. The next book is something I have not managed to read yet. It's All the Young Men by Ruth Burks with Kevin Carr O'Leary. This is an interesting book because there have been some accusations that the story that Ruth Burks tells in this is at least exaggerated. Nobody disputes that she did do the things that she says she did, which is that she sat with AIDS patients when their families and medical professionals who were supposed to watch them and care for them were afraid of them. This was done at a time when there's still a huge stigma around HIV and AIDS. But this was when there was also a lot of fear and misinformation. And again, there still is, but this was when it was really prevalent because it was still fairly new. Joel did read this and really liked it. It was one of his favorite nonfiction books of last year. I have not gotten around to it yet, but I would still like to, and I've heard really great things about it. So at some point, it will happen. The final book for my March of 2022 book haul is A Place Called Winter by Patrick Gale, and I really want to read this. I just didn't manage to fit it in last year. I feel like it's a natural candidate for my pile of possibilities for Pride Month. In Pride Month, I like to pretty exclusively read LGBTQ plus books. And every year I do a pile of possibilities that I choose from during the month. And I feel like this is a natural fit for my pile for 2023. So I still want to read it. I haven't gotten around to doing it yet, but I would love to. I've heard so many really good things about this book that I can't help but be curious and want to prioritize it. Of the books on here that I have not read, I feel like this is the one that I'm most likely to get to next. And I don't actually know between Disoriental and All the Young Men, which one I would likely do next. But this one is probably my biggest priority from that book haul. So 4 books in March of 2022. I have read one of them, and I have not unhauled any, and none of them are on the cusp of being unhauled. These are good choices that I'm happy to have in my library until I get around to. I do feel like I'm much more likely to do All the Young Men on audio, like Joel did. However, I'm perfectly fine having it on my shelf and waiting around to get to it in that form. So let's not spend a lot of time dallying before we move to the next one, which is March of 2021. The first book that I hauled that year was Last Call, A True Story of Love, Lust, and Murder in Queer New York by Elon Green. I did read this book. I actually listened to this on audio in the end. That is something that I have really discovered as I have done these book haul revisits. I am much more likely to listen to nonfiction books on audio than I am to listen to a fiction book on audio. And I know some people are different about that. Something about the nonfiction element just feels easier. I feel like when there's fiction, I spend a lot more time thinking about what an author is doing, what their word choice means, and how everything is flowing and being constructed. And sometimes I like to do that on the page better. I do listen to a lot of fiction via audio, but I've noticed that nonfiction is something that I almost hesitate to purchase anymore because I know I'm much more likely to listen to it on audio than I am. And one thing about that as well is I listened to it and then I picked up the book after because I had ordered it and it wasn't in yet. And there are footnotes in the book. And sometimes the footnotes actually change your understanding of something. Like one of the footnotes that I saw was there was a character talking about how he had been to a training with the New York Mets or the New York Yankees, one of the New York baseball teams. And the footnote says there's no evidence that this is true. And that footnote is not in the audio. So, and I understand it's difficult to put a footnote into an audiobook, but that really changes your understanding of that person who was talking and gives you clues that maybe you shouldn't trust them. I mean, you kind of get the idea, but it's much more explicit, like there's no evidence that this is true. So I did read this. I liked it. I don't do a lot of true crime. To me, there has to be something interesting, and this does have that added element of talking about New York and the reasons why police didn't get too involved in helping find a serial killer who was targeting gay men. And it's interesting from a sociological perspective and not just from a true crime perspective. So that's how I was able to access this book. The next one is a success story as well. It's Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I was really excited when this book was published because I have read 2 other books by Kazuo Ishiguro. They are The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go. You can probably see Never Let Me Go right here on my shelf faced out because I absolutely love it. I know there are some people who are not huge Never Let Me Go fans. The story structure is a little bit rambling. I am a huge fan, and I think the way the narrative unfolds is actually fascinating to me. And the same is true of The Remains of the Day, which reveals things in very complicated and interesting ways as the narrative unspools. So I've been a big fan of Ishiguro's work. And this was obviously a new novel that was published then, and to me, it was a disappointment. But I did read it, so there's that. I still want to read a lot of Ishiguro's books, but this was the first one I read that was a bit of a miss. And a miss from Ishiguro is still much better than, even a good book from a lot of other authors, but it's not something I'm passionate about. And to be honest, sometimes when I did need space on my shelves, I would look at it and think, I don't know if I need to have this on my shelf, but because I like Ishiguro, I'm letting it sit with the other ones. And now that I don't really have a need for space, it's not so much of an issue. But if it were any other author, I probably would be thinking about an unhaul if I wouldn't have unhauled it already. The next book that I hauled in March of 2021 is actually something I unhauled. I almost went to a book that I have here. It's What's Mine and Yours by Naima. And I think the last time I did a book haul revisit, I mentioned that because I hadn't gotten to this, the urgency had died down. A lot of people told me that I should read it. However, ultimately, I really needed space, and I did let it go because I figure I'm much more likely to read this on audio, and then it won't take up space on my shelf. So I made a tough decision last summer. I really needed space in the library. I do still want to read the book, and I take the recommendations to read it to heart. But, I think it's also telling that months later, I still haven't gotten to it. The urgency definitely kind of died down. I'm still interested. I still have it saved in my list to get to at some point on audio, but it's not on my shelf anymore. Then we have the final revival of Opal and Nev, which I did read and really enjoyed. I liked this book a lot. I've known some other people who read it and didn't engage with it because I think there are flaws in this book, but I really thought it had told an interesting story. It had some interesting points about fame and celebrity and race in this country. It's told as an oral history, and I think that's a very interesting structure for a book. So I liked this, and I'm glad that I read it, and I will continue to recommend it to other people as well. That takes us to the final book that I hauled in March of 2021, which I had actually already read before. It's Asterios, Polyp by David Mazzucchelli. I had, sorry, there was dust floating in front of my face. I had owned a copy of this and read it a long time ago, and I loved it. And I moved a bunch of times in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and I don't think I got rid of my copy, but a bunch of books that I owned somehow kind of went missing. You lose track of things, and maybe you do make hard decisions and get rid of them, and you don't remember later. But I was thinking about this book last year and how much I liked it and how much I would like to reread it at some point, or just that I missed having it in my library, so I bought a copy, and here it is. And I have not reread it yet, but I did read it before I purchased it, and so I know I like it. I think it would just be interesting to revisit at some point. So I have not had a reread of it yet. So there were 5 books that I hauled in March of 2021, and I've read 4. That's really good. Now, admittedly, I read one of them before I purchased it, but still, it counts. I've read it, so that's not bad. And because I had read it, I knew I wanted it in my library. Like, it wouldn't be here if I hadn't already read it. So to me, it still counts. And there is one unhaul from that group. And again, it's a sort of a sad unhaul. It comes from just making tough decisions about what I have room for in my library. And that's all. Now, I'm going to try to move March of 2020 up here so I can more easily access the pile and slide this one over here without knocking anything over. Only knocked one book over, so that's a pretty good start. All right, so in March of 2020, I brought 9 books into my library. The first one is Deacon King Kong by James McBride, which I did read. I had read The Good Lord Bird by James McBride and really loved it. And Deacon King Kong was a bit of a disappointment. I still liked it, but not with the same amount of passion that I had for The Good Lord Bird in any regard. And actually, you can see The Good Lord Bird right there on my shelf. That's it. So I read it. I was gifted an advanced copy from someone on the BookTube community who sent me actually the next one as well. The next one also came from that person, and it is also an ARC. This one I have not gotten to reading yet. It is The Collected Stories of Lori Moore. It's a big brick of a book. Someday I will get around to it. I do want to read more short stories. I used to read a lot more short stories than I do now. I've gotten a little bit stuck on novels and novellas, but I love short stories. I know there are people who have problems with them, but I'm a huge fan of them. So this is something that would naturally catch my interest, and I haven't read anything of Lori Moore's before. So I still really want to get to it, even though it takes up a lot of space on my shelf. I haven't gotten around to reading it, but I will be happy to get to it whenever I have the time and the inclination to do so. And then we have a book that I got rid of, The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I did that as a buddy read with Berta Bowler, I believe, and neither one of us really liked it. And I still have a copy of Station 11 on my shelf somewhere in the vicinity of this. And I just didn't feel like holding on to my copy of The Glass Hotel. I did not like it. I think I have a full review of it. If I do, I'll link it down below. I talk much more at length about why it didn't feel like something that I should keep on my shelf. So it's gone. But I did read it. So there's that. And the next one is actually another book I gave away, but this time as a gift. It was later, My Life at the Edge of the World by Paul Lisicki. It's a memoir, and because of the type of memoir that it is, after I read it, I figured that Chelsea from Montana Book Company would be interested in it, so I gifted it to her. And I don't know if she's read it or not, but either way, whenever she does get around to it, I think it's a good home for that book, and she will be interested in it as well. So I don't regret anything. That takes us to Cleanness by Garth Greenwell, which I have not gotten around to. I think Joel tried to read this and really didn't like it because there was an element of... I could be thinking of a wrong book, so I won't say anything, but he did not like it and did not finish. And his experience of the book has made me hold off. I know a lot of people have loved it, and at some point I think I might try for myself. But in the meantime, it's just sitting with the other book of Garth Greenwell's that I have on my shelf. And I've really slowed down any intention of getting to it because of that experience that Joel had with it, but part of me thinks I might try it someday. If it's still here and unread at this time next year, I might start thinking about, why am I holding on to this when clearly I'm not going to get around to reading it. But yeah, there was my memory is that there were some triggers for Joel, and the handling of them is something he didn't like. So that is why I've been hesitating. But so if you have thoughts on Cleanness by Garth Greenwell, let me know in the comment section down below what you thought about it, and if you think it's something that I should try for myself. The next book I brought into my library in March of 2020 is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. This is another book in translation and another book that is translated that doesn't have the name of the translator on the cover. It's Stephen Snyder. I was obsessed with these vintage Japan editions, and I think this is the last one that I had gotten in that. No, there were probably more at some point. I don't remember. But anyway, it's The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. I keep hearing really good things about this book. It's a slim little thing, so I could potentially do it really easily. I just haven't had time to do it yet. I'm happy to hold on to it and get to it at some point, and I feel like I will do so. It's just a matter of time and inclination and not having anything else on my plate. After that, there was Writers and Lovers by Lily King, which I had read Euphoria by Lily King and liked it, but Writers and Lovers was just sitting there. I heard very mixed things about it, and I didn't quite feel like I was ever going to read it. So I was talking to Brian at Bookish, and he expressed interest in that book, so I offered to send him my copy. So that is another one that I gifted to someone else. And I can't remember if he's read it or not, but again, I'm happy that he has it. It has a good home, and if I had held on to it, I guarantee you I still would not have read it. So it's better off with him than it is just sitting on my shelf, not doing anything. And then there was The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. I did end up unhauling that. What I realized is I had all of the books of Erik Larson that I have read. I did one on ebook back in the days when I read ebooks, and that was The Devil in the White City. And then all of the others I listened to on audio. And Splendid and the Vile is a brick of a book. So the likelihood that I would read it was very small compared to listening to it on audio. And in fact, I got rid of the book, and a couple of weeks later, I ended up listening to it on audio. And I thought it was fine. I didn't really like it. I am coming to accept that most Erik Larson books I find interesting, but I have some kind of a problem with. Some little nitpicky detail that I don't really like. And I understand a lot of people really love Erik Larson. That's fine. That's my experience with him. So I'm probably... And this is something I came to with Book Haul Revisits. Once I thought about it, I was like, I'm really going to do that on audio. So that's why it's not here anymore. And I ended up not really liking it much anyway. So even if I had read the physical book, I probably would have ended up getting rid of it. And the final book is The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. I accidentally ordered a copy of the British version of this. And I say accidentally because I thought I was hitting a button on the website that would translate the price to American dollars. And I hit the buy button and I just leaned into it and said, all right, you know what, fine. I like this version much better than the American one. So that's why I have this one. I did read it. I ended up reading it for the BookTube prize, and I didn't like it as much as Bring Up the Bodies, but I did like it. So sad that we lost Hilary Mantel. I think she is a tremendous writing talent. So in March of 2020, I brought 9 books into my library. I've read 5 and I've unhauled 3, 2 of them as gifts. That's where we're at with that. And that takes us to the final year in my book haul, which is March of 2019, my first ever book haul on this channel. And the first one is an unhaul. It's Leading Men by Christopher Castellani. I was really excited about this book because it's a novel about Tennessee Williams in Italy. At the time, I really wanted to go to Italy. I have now been to Italy. But I ended up only reading half of the book. It didn't live up to the expectation, so I ended up getting rid of it. And there it is. No sense dragging it out. I didn't like it, didn't finish it, and didn't feel a need to keep it on my shelf. So it's gone, and that's fine. Now, because I was reading Leading Men, and it was about Tennessee Williams, and it kind of deals with The Night of the Iguana, I got interested in it, and I went out and I purchased a copy of The Night of the Iguana. I do love Tennessee Williams plays. I don't know if you can see, but I have Tennessee Williams' notebooks on my nonfiction shelf over there, faced out. I love that book. I'm just a Tennessee Williams fan. I have not read this one yet, but I would still like to, and it's a play, so it would take an afternoon probably, and at some point I'll do it. This to me is a library builder. I didn't have any intent. If I had liked Leading Men, I probably would have built right into this, but I didn't like Leading Men, so instead I just kind of wanted a little bit of distance, and that's why I didn't dive right into this. But I would love to read it at some point, and I think I will. So it's totally fine taking up some space on my shelf. Then I read Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I believe at the time Normal People was gearing up for its release in the United States, and just everybody was talking about Sally Rooney. Everybody was talking about Sally Rooney. So I felt like I needed to jump on that bandwagon and experience one of her books, and it seemed like a good place to start with this one and not wait for Normal People to be released in the US. I did read it, and I thought it was just okay. I kind of appreciated the craft, but I didn't like the book. I didn't like the characters. And ultimately, I decided not to continue into Normal People. I still have a copy of Normal People on my shelf. I might get to it someday, but I don't feel any rush. I have the distinct impression that Sally Rooney is just an author that I can appreciate, but not particularly like, if that makes sense. Maybe that's unfair, but, you know, it is what it is. That takes us to The Best We Could Do, a graphic memoir by T. Bui, and I loved this book so much. In fact, I loaned it to my neighbors at one point because we were having a conversation about graphic novels and graphic memoirs, and they were talking about how they knew Fun Home, but didn't know other examples of ones that were good. And I was like, I know exactly which one you should read. So I brought it over to them, loaned it to them. So clearly, I'm a fan. I really liked this book a lot and would continue to recommend it. So if you have not read The Best We Could Do, I absolutely would recommend it to you. It's a fantastic story. I love it. It's very good and really well illustrated as well. I'm not going to open it because there is like nudity in the book. So I think if I remember right, at one point when I was talking about the book on my channel, I held it open to show off the illustrations and there was nudity on the page and I felt so embarrassed. I don't care, but I feel like YouTube and its algorithms might care. So, for the best to kind of leave that out. That takes us to a book I unhauled, Speak No Evil by Uzodinma Owela. I did read this book. I don't remember when, possibly 2020, possibly 2021. I really did not like it, and that's why I got rid of it. It is not the book that I thought I was getting. Sometimes that's a good surprise when a book takes a detour from what you expected it to be. In this case, it was not, because it was very much the premise of the book as described on the jacket and to me is that it's about a a young man whose parents had immigrated from Africa, and he is secretly gay, and his father finds out and sends him back to Africa as a sort of conversion attempt. And that does happen in the book, but it happens in the first 50 pages of the book and is actually a very minor detail. Like, that is handled and done, and then he's back in the United States very quickly. And it's actually about something else, and it turns out the book is much more about his white female friend than it is about him, and I just did not like the book. So it's gone. It's not here anymore, and I do not look back at that. Which takes us to Cloudbursts, which is a story collection by Thomas McGuane. I have not read it. I still really want to. I believe these involve Montana, which is where I live. And for that reason, they're interesting. I've heard really good things about Thomas McGuane. This is something that jumped onto my radar because the New York Times did a feature on it about paperback releases, and it sounded really interesting. So I grabbed it. I just haven't gotten around to reading it, but I really want to at some point. Maybe this will be the year. Yeah. I'm also really interested in Montana in fiction because obviously I have moved here, but I'm really looking forward to getting to this at some point. And speaking of stories, we have The Largesse of the Sea Maiden by Dennis Johnson. I have not gotten around to reading this yet, but I would really like to. I've read other books by Dennis Johnson and have liked them. And I remember hearing good things about this when it was initially released. So I would like to get around to it. This ended up being his last book. Unfortunately, he passed away, I don't think long after it was released. So it's a shame. I am a fan of his writing, so I would recommend him, even though I can't specifically recommend that book since I haven't read it yet. And that takes us to the final book from my March of 2019 book haul, Spectacles, a memoir by Sue Perkins. Yes, I have purchased and read a memoir by Mary Berry, and I have purchased and read a memoir by Sue Perkins. I'm that level of gay about the Great British Bake Off. It's my favorite TV show. I love it. It's just my jam. So I read it. I liked it. Boy, did I cry. I was like emotionally devastated because in one part of the book she gets a dog and then she loses the dog. And at the time I hadn't even lost a dog. And I just, it was really emotionally difficult. I do think the parts of it where she's an adult lose it a little bit. And that's sort of common in celebrity memoirs. I feel like when they are young, they feel like they have permission to do dumb things, to occasionally be rude and kind of weird and wacky and all that stuff. And as they become an adult, they get much more guarded about their story and things become a lot more superficial. There's not as much insight into what's going on in their lives. And this is absolutely one of those memoirs. But I did enjoy it. And I love Sue Perkins. I wish she would come back and host or co-host Great British Bake Off with Mel Giedroyc, and it would be so much better if we could get her back on that show. But anyway, so of these, I hauled 8 books in March of 2019, and I read 4.5. Again, I only made it halfway through Leading Men by Christopher Castellani, and I have unhauled 2 books. I don't think any of the other ones are close to an unhaul. If anything, like if I needed space, Conversations with Friends would be on the hook. But it's fine. I don't need the space. I thought it was interesting enough. I'm not passionate about it. So if I do get to a point where I need room in the R's in my library, it would be on the chopping block, but it's fine. You know, it can stay. It's fine. Now, let's talk about overall. In all 4 of these book hauls, I brought 26 books into my library. Sorry, I had to lean a little closer to see my laptop because there's glare coming from the window. Hopefully you can't see it too much. And of those 26 books, I have read 14 and a half. Again, I only read half of Leading Men before I got rid of it. So 14 and a half out of 26 is probably, it's a really good record for me. A lot of times I've read less than half of the books that I brought into my library, which is part of why it's helpful for me to do this, because it helps me be more intentional as a book purchaser. And I have only unhauled 6 out of the 26. So I still have 20 books to deal with and think about and read, or maybe eventually think about getting rid of if I need the space. But we're not in danger of that right now. So if you have thoughts or feedback about any of these books, please let me know in the comment section down below. If you have recommendations based on books that I've liked or been interested in, I would love to hear those as well. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.